Got the morning latte going, everybody. Mm. I've got a different type of coffee bean, and it's kind of an earthy type of flavor, really different, kind of dry. Still really good, but just a little bit different than what I'm used to. So got a new bag, so new supplier. So we'll see how that works out. Today, anybody, good to see you. Today we're going to talk about hypertrophy and strength gains, key points of volume, failure, sets per muscle group, things like that, and also to not be that guy. Okay. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people who are those guys that they don't understand how to read studies and they make some pretty wild claims. I want to go over some of this because as I was enjoying my latte and the nice, calm, cool, relaxing morning that I was having, I ran across a video, and of course, it was Dr. Is. If you end up, you see this guy here, and what he's talking about is a program that let me see if I can pull this up. He's talking about a program where it talks about gaining a lot of hypertrophy and strength gains. And seriously, come on. Let me see if I can get it to actually. This is where you take 70%. So anyway, on this, he talks about, I know it's kind of washed out, but it talks about how there's this Strager test or a Strager study by a guy named Strager in 2019, which is a number of years back, and it's called the 3-7 method. You have 5 sets, and then you do 3 to 7 reps. In other words, increasing the reps from 3 reps, you do a set, and then you do your next set, you would do 4 reps, then 5, then 6, then 7. So, you do a number of sets. You do 5 sets with pretty much a low rep range, and that is kind of a good combination because when you're looking at 3 repetitions, you're looking at building strength, and when you get up to 7, you're getting more into that hypertrophy range and out of strength training, but it's still kind of low. Usually what a lot of people recommend is 6 to 12 repetitions, but that's not set in stone because there's a lot of other things that come into play when we're talking about we're talking about hypertrophy and strength gains and so on and so forth. So anyway, as I was reading the comments, it was really interesting because some people added some interesting information, some other studies. Then you have people that just don't know what they're talking about, and they don't understand studies and how to analyze them, how to glean the useful information, and how to separate the wheat from the chaff and things like that. Anyway, this guy, Scott, says this is not a recent study. It's 5 years old. Okay, we know we're getting off on the wrong foot here, Scott. And he says, I appreciate that the doctor stated further research is needed to support this. The fact that further research to support this has not occurred lends me to believe it's complete and total bullshit. Seriously, Scott, and this guy is Scott Lanigan, Lanigan, and this is unfortunate because really what this study shows is not that you do 5 sets with rep ranges of 3 to 7, and then you do that 2 times per muscle group. In other words, you're doing 10 sets per muscle group for a workout, and then if you work out 2 times a week, you're doing 20 sets with those rep ranges. So 20 sets, you're looking at volume. What's interesting is when you look at the other studies and meta-analysis on hypertrophy and strength gains, we see, especially with hypertrophy, volume is very, very important. Now, this isn't saying that the only way to get big, and they claim that what they came to the conclusion is you get 80% better hypertrophy gains using this 3-7 method versus the control group that they have. That does not negate all of the other studies that have happened in the past, which were 10, 15, 20 years ago, things like that. Just to start off, it's really interesting because if you read all these other studies, you see these commonalities, one being volume. Volume is key when it comes to working out. Now, you can have a lot of volume, but it can be lightweight and you don't get a good workout or good resistance placed upon those muscles, so they're not going to respond as well as if you had worked to failure. So if you don't work to failure with volume, those are the two things that we have, and those things working together, when you have that volume and they have the increased number of sets and working to failure or close to it, that will result in hypertrophy. Granted, your nutrition is on par. Granted, your recovery time is in check and you have good time to recover and so on and so forth. And then there comes all the other variables of just being a human being. How well your body responds, the receptors, how much HGH and testosterone or free testosterone is your body producing, total testosterone, those things are not the same, okay? Total testosterone or free testosterone is like anyway, we talk about human growth hormone, the receptors in the body that receive the testosterone, the human growth hormone that is made by the body, and the ability to process and flip those switches to make that hypertrophy happen. Unfortunately, Scott here doesn't seem to understand, because he thinks if a study is he says it's 5 years old, so it's not recent. So he's coming to the conclusion that this study doesn't come to any useful information and thus is not true. The problem with that is you have a number of participants. You have a controlled study with controlled results and data and measurements and so on and so forth, and then they come to a conclusion based upon the control group and what they did with the 3-7 group, and they found some very good information. But again, it's not that this 3-7 workout routine is better than all other workout routines. It really depends on the things like volume, working to failure or close to it, the number of sets per muscle group. So it's kind of interesting. I want to go over a little bit of information. What do we got going on here? Let's just do this. Okay. And what we'll end up doing is taking a look at this here. And I'm gone. Where have I gone? I will need to get myself into camera overlay. Boom. Okay. What we're going to talk about is the number of sets and reps. So usually for muscle endurance, what we end up seeing as a general rule of thumb is 12 to 20 reps per set will get you into that endurance phase. 2 to 4 sets, rest 30 to 60 seconds between sets is really good. When we're talking about muscular size or hypertrophy, we're looking at generally 6 to 12 repetitions per set, 3 to 5 sets. And again, it depends on how many times you're working out. Generally, what we're looking at is a minimum of 2 times a week per muscle group. 3 times is better, okay? And 3 to 5 sets, it's interesting because 1 set per muscle group will only get you so much hypertrophy and strength gains. When you look at hypertrophy and strength and multiple sets, if you do 2 to 3 sets, that'll get you 40 to 45 to 46% increase in hypertrophy and strength. But again, hypertrophy is a fickle thing because volume is key. Muscle strength, 1 to 5 sets, reps per set, 4 to 6 sets, rest 3 to 5 minutes between sets, sometimes even longer. So really what we can end up doing here is we can see a lot of good information when it comes to how do we get big. And if we're just talking about hypertrophy, even 6 to 12 sets or reps per set and 3 to 5 sets and doing that 2 or 3 times a week and resting 60 to 120 seconds, that's not set in stone. And the interesting thing is again, when we go back and we look at volume, we look at working to failure and the number of sets per muscle group. The interesting tool is that we found out on, where is it? Okay, in a study by Ray Adeli, which is right here in 2015, PubMed ID 255-46444, had participants perform 1, 3, or 5 sets per exercise with 2 exercises for the biceps, 3 for the triceps, and a 3 times per week full body training program. So for the triceps, the set volume per week was 6, 18, and 30, and for the triceps was 9, 27, and 45. All the sets were performed to failure, and the study lasted 6 months. Now, this is a pretty good, I would say this is a pretty good study because of the fact that it went for 6 months. With the exception of the bench press, the results, all the measures showed more is better dose response all the way up to the super high volumes of 45 sets per week. So I remember back in the day, it ended up that for hypertrophy, it was thought to be 10, 15 sets per week per muscle group, and that was it. And anything after that was considered junk volume. Now, if you don't know what junk volume is, it means that if you do more sets than this certain number X, that you will not get a good return, and so more isn't always better. However, the good thing that we have with studies and meta-analysis on hypertrophy and strength gains in both of those is that we see volume, especially for hypertrophy, we're not limited to just 10 or 15 sets. Like I said, it went up to 20 sets. There's other studies that got up to 30. This one went up to 27 and 45 sets. It's just really interesting. And it says there were more tricep thickness gains for the group performing 45 sets of triceps per week. And again, the commonality is they were working towards failure. We have this other study by Schoenfeld in 2018 where it talks about found strength-trained men performed 1, 3, and 5 sets per exercise during an 8-week study. This led to a total weekly number of sets per muscle group of 6 and 9 sets for the first group, 18 to 27 sets for the third set group, which is interesting because usually anything above 15 was considered junk volume, and if you're getting into 18 and 20, 25, 30 almost, it was just deemed useless for hypertrophy. And then 30 and 45 sets for the 5-set group in upper and lower limbs, respectively. So the training volume was 50% higher for the quads and for the triceps and biceps. All sets were performed to failure. The results, there was a clear dose response of training volume with higher volumes resulting in markedly greater muscle growth, which is, it all comes down to volume and failure and how many times you work out per week, 2 to 3 times a week. 3 times is really good. And being able to get the proper rest and recovery and fuel enough protein, at least I think the current studies show it's like 0.7 or 0.73 grams per pound of body weight all the way up to 1 gram. But really, when you start getting into 1 gram, is it really necessary? Some studies show that that is not the case, that around a 0.7, 0.73, I think there was another one that was like 0.75. That seems to be the sweet spot to get the most bang for your buck for protein intake and muscle protein synthesis. So rest times as far as between sets, because that's kind of interesting as well. Remember how we looked at this little thing here where it talks about for muscle endurance, you do 30 to 60 seconds of rest. Hypertrophy is like 1 to 2 minutes between, and then 3 to 5 for muscle gains. That's kind of interesting because here what we end up seeing is that there are studies showing that with more sets or higher reps, and again, higher reps or more sets and higher reps isn't necessarily a bad thing for hypertrophy. It's beneficial to have longer rest times of 2 to 5 minutes. In the study, longer interset rest periods enhance muscle strength and hypertrophy in resistance-trained men by Schoenfeld, which is a really good study. This study provides evidence that longer rest periods promote greater increases in muscle strength and hypertrophy in young resistance-trained men with 3-minute times. So if you don't rest longer than 3 minutes, don't think that this will have an adverse effect on your hypertrophy. So that's something else that we need to take a look at. And when you read studies and look at studies, you might think, well, because it used to be for hypertrophy way back in the day that only, let me get us back to this page, boom, and we'll get rid of that. It used to be thought that you do your workouts, you got to have 30 seconds of rest, and then you move on to the next one, or even you do a superset. So in other words, you do one exercise, then you do another exercise immediately after, or you kind of go back and forth between like bicep and tricep, and kind of go back and forth with no rest periods. Whatever it is in regards to rest periods, that was deemed as being the best for hypertrophy. But what we're finding out is that rest times are very important when we're talking about hypertrophy, and longer rest times allows the central nervous system to reset, to refresh. You're able to regain some strength, and you can go back and you can put more work towards failure on that following set that you're doing, which is going to produce more resistance onto those muscle fibers, which is going to break down more, which is going to result in more muscle building or hypertrophy. So when you have people like Scott, this guy Scott, who says, well, that study's 5 years old, and it's not, in other words, it's not recent enough for him. So somehow that negates the findings of the study. Well, what about studies that are 10, 15, 20 years old? Are they not considered valid as well because they haven't done any more studies? No, that's absolutely untrue. It's interesting because you can do a study, and a study can be old, and there are no further studies that were done because maybe at that time there were enough studies to conclude. In other words, you have a meta-analysis, a group of studies that were conducted, and they all conclude the same thing, that the researchers are like, yeah, we don't need to do this anymore because it's been clearly defined by these number of studies. We did a meta-analysis. So yeah, it would just basically be a waste of time to do more studies on top of the other studies in the meta-analysis for hypertrophy strength or whatever it is. So yeah, the whole thing that this guy Scott here is just doesn't make sense. And he says he appreciates that the doctor stated further research is needed to support this. Pretty much every study you read will have that type of phrasing. And it's evident in pretty much every study in some way, shape, or form because they're looking at a certain number of variables. They want to minimize the variables that are there. They want to have a control group. They want to have a placebo, account for that. Testing before, during, and after, and to look at the data and what does that data, what conclusions do they come to? In other words, they do the scientific process to find out what can we glean from this? What benefits do we get from testing and doing it this way versus the other way? Or other ways, or things that were thought to be true, let's test it and see if it actually is. This guy Scott seems to think that, just because a study or meta-analysis has a phrase that says, well, further research is needed, well, yeah, further research is needed. This research that was done on this study for the 3-7 method only dealt with the 3-7 method. So in other words, when it says more research is needed, now maybe the next study will be a 3-7 method versus some other type of method or routine for hypertrophy along with a control group, and then they can glean some other useful information. But having that phrase in a study does not negate the finds of that study and things that we can pull out, which we see is volume is important, training to failure, the number of sets per muscle group, and so on and so forth. The fact that further research to support this has not occurred leads me to believe it's complete and total bullshit. Now there's the winner. There's the guy, Scott Lanigan. And yeah, I'm sorry, that's just not how it works, Scott. When you start looking at hypertrophy and reading studies and looking at strength gains and things like this, you can get a lot of useful information. And the thing is, you'll have studies on hypertrophy that deal with maybe 5 sets per muscle group, maybe 10, maybe 15, 18, a wide variety of number of repetitions. So you can't really say that the 3-7 method is the best way. And so when researchers put in there more study is needed, in other words, it's the scientists being truthful and open to the fact that, yeah, this isn't the silver bullet for hypertrophy. We found 80% better hypertrophy gains versus a control method using the 3-7 method, which a big key component is volume and working to failure, and rest periods and things like that. But it doesn't mean that other studies that have done for maybe 10 or 15 or 20 sets per muscle group per week, even up to 45 sets. And there was another study that I read. Let me see if I have it here. No, it's not on this one. But anyway, there were some other studies that even went into higher number of sets, like 50 sets per week, and they still got hypertrophy gains. And the interesting thing is there was no decline. So in other words, they didn't get to the point of where we started getting diminishing returns. But again, there's a lot of other variables that come into play when we're talking about hypertrophy. When we talk about hypertrophy, we're talking about is it young men? Is it young women? Is it untrained men or untrained women? Is it seasoned lifters? What I do like about hypertrophy and strength studies and all this stuff when we're talking about physical fitness and how to get big and strong and jacked or whatever it is, the interesting thing is that all of these studies are done with normal everyday people. In other words, people that are not doing steroids, because that is just a variable that doesn't come into play. So when we read studies on hypertrophy and we see that high volume, when we're seeing working to failure, and you can work to failure and you get to a point where you can only do so many sets, and if your rest periods between sets is only 30 to 60 seconds, you're going to be limited in how much volume you can do because you go to failure and you don't have the ability to recover. So if you increased the rest period between your sets, you're able to do more sets, get more resistance, and more of that effect onto the muscles, and you'll get better MPS response, muscle protein synthesis. And again, all things being equal, nutrition, recovery, so on and so forth. So yeah, it's just interesting on how people don't understand, or they'll look at studies and say, well, they'll have a confirmational bias. So they'll pick out one study out of hundreds or thousands of studies, and because that is similar to what they do, they say they have these blinders on. They say this is the only way to get muscle, and it's not. And what they'll do is they'll search for studies or things that support what they believe. That's called confirmational bias. But when you have studies that directly contradict what they believe, they say those researchers, those people that have PhDs, those people that are doctors, that are sports specialists, professionals that have been, they don't know what they're talking about. And it's like, really? Studies that have had thousands and thousands of people, and they had control groups and so on, and measurements and DEXA scans and muscle biopsies to look at the before, during, and after of these tests and studies, coming to the conclusion of whether this is good for hypertrophy or not, or strength gains, and what is the measurement before, during, and after for certain number of sets and exercises and so on and so forth, range of motion. How does all that come about? For some reason, they think that, nope, because I got my gains in this certain way, they think that's the only way for everybody. And all of these other people, these scientists and other studies, it's just it's hokey, it's BS. And that couldn't be further from the truth. You can have somebody that does 20 sets per muscle group and works towards failure, hard failure, and they will get a good hypertrophy response. But then you can also have somebody that does 15 sets or 30 or 40 sets, and they will still get a good hypertrophy response. But they might have a lower volume, not necessarily a lower volume, but a lower intensity of working to failure, which is really interesting. When we talk about volume, how much weight are we lifting? And that's another variable that comes into play. Recently, within the last year, I've noticed some internet shit influencers when it comes to the fitness space. They claim this one set per body part, and you only exercise twice a week for 15 or 20 minutes a week of full body exercise. And that will give you the best response for hypertrophy and strength gains and blah, blah, blah. Well, there are no studies supporting that claim, but that doesn't stop these influencers from claiming that it does. And oh, by the way, isn't it interesting that these people who make these wild claims are trainers that are trying to sell you a product? What are the odds? What are the odds? Just to let you know, I don't have a dog in this hunt because I don't sell anything. Okay? I just look at the studies. I look at what's worked for thousands of people and participants, and I glean the information and say, okay, well, if volume is key and I'm having a sticking point where I'm trying to grow a certain body part, then I need to increase the volume. One of those things was my upper chest. My upper chest was really, really kind of weak, and I didn't have, that little burr, popping out there. So when I read studies on hypertrophy, and when I found some of the key components that I was missing, I was working to failure, and I was doing like 30-second rests between sets, but I wasn't allowing myself enough recovery, so that limited the amount of volume that I could do, which limited the muscle response that I got. So when I started reading studies and seeing, resting between sets for 2 to 5 minutes, that's not going to kill your gains. That will also allow me to put more volume onto that body part. And what I ended up doing is getting more response. I get more muscle building in those areas. Then the light bulb went on. Then it was like, okay, now I get it. And so when you learn how to read a study and see the commonalities in multiple studies, you can take that thing and say, okay, well, now I'm going to incorporate that into my routine and see how it works for 3, 4, 6 months, a year, whatever. And that's been very helpful. And the great thing is that this has already been done with multiple participants, thousands of people. So it gets you on the board. It gets you closer instead of just kind of doing all this crazy stuff that people have no support for whatsoever. So when you have people like these fitness made-up influencers that say 1 set per body part, there was 4 studies that were done talking about for hypertrophy, is that 2 to 3 sets is anywhere from 40 to 46% more effective for hypertrophy when you do 2 to 3 sets versus 1 set. Now, the interesting thing is these people that say the 1 set per body part, you got to give it 110%. That more is not always better, unfortunately. And there actually have been studies in regards to failure and the amount of weight that you lift. Do you do 100% of your 1 rep max? Or can you still get good hypertrophy gains or strength gains when we're talking about lower percentages? That's very interesting. We also know that with higher percentages in that weight, we also see a correlation of higher accidents and incidents of injury. So that's why the majority of fitness organizations like NASM and all these other ones where you get to be a certified trainer, that they recommend that you work at 70% of your 1 rep max. Because when you go higher into 80, 90, and 100%, we also see a marked increase in the number of injuries, muscle strains and things like that. And the worst being like muscle tears, pec tears, bicep tears, because we're just overloading the system, doing too much with too much, and that's not a good thing. In the effort or the hopes that what we end up getting is, let me get my little fan going here. That feels good. In the hopes of getting hypertrophy. So we always think that more is better. We always think that training to failure is better. But really, the studies show that if you work at 70% of your 1 rep max, you can still have high volume and you can still work to failure or close to it, and you can still get great muscle hypertrophy or strength gains. And really going to 100% is not going to catapult you into a place where you get more, especially 1 set per body part. It's just not, that's not how it works. And anybody that claims that is absolutely crazy. I've mentioned this before on other videos talking about like Mike Mentzer, Dorian Yates and Mike Mentzer, and they're one set per body part. First of all, I get tired of fitness influencers who are peddling their special routine of one set per body part, claiming to do 100% failure, and really they don't. And the thing that bothers me is that it shows that, one, they haven't read Mike Mentzer's program or Dorian Yates's program, because it's not one set per body part. You'll actually see, if you read those books, and I used to have them, now I've got them on digital format, but I actually had the physical books, and what you go through is you read these and it says, oh, you do a warm-up set of 70% of 1 rep max, and then another set, and then you do 1 working set. So in other words, they did 3 sets. And what do we see from the studies that have been done today? 2 to 3 sets will give you 40 to 46% more hypertrophic response than doing just 1 set, even at 100%. With all things being equal, studies have shown that, 2 to 3 sets is going to put more volume and more stress on those muscles, so the response is going to be more hypertrophy. Granted, all the other variables, nutrition, are the same. So, it just shows that these people who make these claims, well, Mike Mentzer, look how big he got. Well, there's a problem with Mike Mentzer and Dorian Yates. Okay, the first is very obvious. These guys were jacked to the gills on steroids. Okay, they went so far beyond their natural potential, which is the exact opposite of what we see in studies and meta-analysis on hypertrophy and strength gains today. Again, all of those studies, unless they're specifically talking about steroid use, which there are very few, and I really don't like looking at those at all, because I want what works for the everyday person like me, and I'm going to take advantage of that. So besides doing a truckload of steroids, and oh, by the way, did you know that Mike Mentzer died of a heart attack, and so did his brother, who was his training partner? I think they were in their 40s, 45, 46, somewhere around there. Yeah, imagine that. What are the odds? What is the death? What are the main causes of death in professional bodybuilders and people who abuse massive amounts of steroids? Stroke, heart attack. What are the odds? So those are poor examples. And then what's interesting is that Mike Mentzer refused to do any third-party testing with his special 1 set per body part routine, which really isn't 1 set per body part. Same thing with Dorian Yates and so on and so forth. It's non sequitur. It doesn't make sense. It's not logical to take those guys and their information who abuse drugs and never had those things tested. In other words, it was bro science, and you will get some hypertrophy. You will get some strength gains from any routine aside from doing nothing. Okay, you will. You can go to the gym and you can have the worst routine ever, but you will get some gains because you're doing something additional to what you were doing before. You're putting some resistance on the muscles, whereas before you weren't. So you're going to get some change. You're going to experience some muscle gain and strength. But people don't seem to understand that. Do you want to settle for just, kind of like the guy that was saying, his name's Phil Ferriss. And he's on these over 50, I'm on an over 50 fitness page, a few of them, and he's on one of them, and he's promoting this 1 set per body part. He does these crazy, he does a set where it's like each repetition is like 20 to 30 seconds long, and it's just like, saying he thinks that creates intensity, and that intensity will result in more hypertrophy. But the thing is that there's been a study that was done that talked about the length of your repetition in regards to time, and how does that what does that result in? Is it more hypertrophy? Is it more strength? Is it more endurance? And the interesting thing that the study found through DEXA scans and muscle biopsies and measurements and things like that, quantifiable evidence and data showed that, that's just not how it works. When you get to the point of where a repetition goes beyond 10 seconds and you get to 15, 20 and longer during that repetition, you're transitioning from hypertrophy into endurance. And so, But he doesn't want to talk about that. He thinks that because it feels more intense, so if I hold this coffee cup out for 5 minutes, it's not that bad. But if I hold it up there for 6 hours, it's going to feel intense. I will get some certain amount of resistance placed on the muscles, but it won't be the most efficient when it comes to hypertrophy. This one set per body part bullshit comes about, and the length of the repetition being 20 or 30 seconds does not mean you're going to get more hypertrophy. Usually what we end up seeing, for at least in that study, is that the shorter amount of time in a repetition, so we're talking about explosive movement and then maybe a 2 or 3 second bringing the weight back down, that'll result in some good strength gains, power, strength. And then hypertrophy is when you're starting to get in the 6 to 10 second range. And at the 10-second range, you're starting to go into the endurance phase. So really what ends up, and there are some other studies that have been done that show that similar results. So that's why I feel that when you do an explosive movement out, like doing a chest, and then you squeeze and contract for 1 to 2 seconds, and then you do a slow decline or slow negative, about 3, 4, maybe even 5 seconds. You're looking at 1 second to put it up, 1 to 2 seconds once you get to the top and contract those muscles, and then you're doing another 4 seconds. You're looking at a 5 to 6 second repetition, and that will put more resistance and more tension on that muscle group, which seems to imply, by the results in the studies I've read, you get more hypertrophy with that. And again, you need to learn how to contract that muscle group. There's a lot of people that don't know how to contract their pecs. They will train their chest, but what they're really doing is getting a real good tricep workout, and they're not flexing their chest. So if you don't know how to contract that muscle that you're actually working, you could be losing some gains. So and the same thing applies with, like your deltoids, your front side or your rear delts. If you don't know how to contract and feel that contraction, you're going to be leaving something on the table. So it's very important that you learn how to contract and feel that muscle. And unfortunately, a lot of people will go too heavy, and they'll go, they think going too heavy and going to failure is going to result in more hypertrophy, when actually they could reduce the amount of weight, say go to 70% or 80% of their 1 rep max. And then as they do that pull, as they're bringing down, saying they're doing a 1-arm lat pull, and then they really concentrate and they contract that lat, you'll get a better response than just trying to lift a heavy weight, where now you're recruiting more of that bicep as you're bringing that in, and more stress is put on the bicep than actually on your lat. So again, there's a lot of variables that come into play when we're talking about fitness and hypertrophy and strength. People have asked me, like for now, what I work out now and what I do now is not what I did 5 years ago or 10 years ago. It's not, because my routine has changed over the years because of studies and meta-analysis that I've read, and saying, okay, well, I used to do this, and then I read the study, I'm like, the thing that I thought was true, the bro science, like the anabolic window, that's not a true thing. Yeah, it's just not a true thing. Eating within 30 to 45 minutes after your workout, if you don't eat a lot of protein, you're going to lose your gains. And it's like studies have shown you can be 6 to 12 hours after your workout. You don't have to eat immediately afterwards. Now, the thing is with hypertrophy is that you're probably going to be eating 4 or 5 times a day. So generally, you're going to be safe in eating after your workout. But the interesting thing is, study shows that it's not needed. There is no anabolic window. You could wait 6 hours and then eat 100 grams of protein, and boom, you're good to go. Which brings to mind where people said, oh, your body can only process 30 grams of protein, 25 or 30 grams. So anything more than that, your body's just going to shit out. That has been disproven, because the study that talked about that was talking about something totally different. And it's interesting. There was a guy recently, I think it was about a month, what is it? It's September now, 2 months ago. that a guy I was talking with about hypertrophy, and he kind of under that same assumption of saying, well, your body can only absorb 30 grams of protein, and so anything more than that, you're just shitting it out, and it's a waste. And it's like, well, wait a second. If you do the math, and you could only do 30 at a sitting, and he was of the school of you eat 3 times a day, so that's 30, 60, 90 grams of protein a day, and that's all you can have, and the rest is crapped out. Then I'm like, then how did I get this big? Because when you do the math, there shouldn't be big guys like me. I'm 255 pounds. You shouldn't have guys that are 260. I was 263 at my largest. You have people that are 270, 300 pounds that have massive amounts of muscle. Guys that are natural and supplemented, but it doesn't really matter. But the fact is, if your body could only produce and process 30 grams of protein or 90 grams per day, you wouldn't have big guys with massive amounts of muscle, whether they're natural or using juice to the gills with steroids. So that disproves that whole thing. And again, if you read that original study, it just shows that people don't know how to read studies. They just take one sentence out of context of the whole thing and say, well, your body can only process 30 grams in 3 meals. Okay, well, then that's only 90 grams. Anything more is useless. That's not how it works in regards to muscle protein synthesis and taking in protein and so on and so forth. Again, a number of studies have been done showing that the optimal is about 0.73 grams per pound of body weight to build muscle. With that being said, what is the amount of protein that you need to maintain that muscle? Well, it depends on the individual, but anywhere below 0.7 would probably be good. Probably 0.6 would be okay. I've kind of dropped down at times to 0.5 and done that, and I've been able to keep some muscle and so on and so forth. The other interesting thing is once you get to the size that you want to be, you don't have to eat a ton of protein all the time. And you don't have to work like a madman in the gym. A recent study that, and I'm looking for it, I haven't found it yet, but somebody referenced it, talking about to maintain your muscle mass, how many times a week do you need to work out? And it came up with 2 times a week. And it's like, interesting. Personally, I work out 3 times a week. So in other words, I work every other day off and then I take weekends off. But during my workouts, I do some intense workouts. My workouts will be about 2.5 hours per workout, and I'll do cardio on top of that as well, during that workout as well. Some things I'll have longer rest periods. It all depends on what I'm working. So, yeah, it's just really interesting. And for those people that are interested in, because I've had people ask me about this, and I think it'd probably be a good time to do this. So I work out basically every other day, and then I'll have a weekend off, and then I go back. So Mondays, what I'll end up doing is biceps and triceps. Tuesday, I'll have a day off. Wednesday, I'll do legs and shoulders, and then a day off. And then day 5, I will do chest and back, and then some time off, and then repeat. So that's what I'm currently doing, but I'm revising this even more because I do a lot of sets. I will do let's take a look at biceps. I'll do like dumbbell hammer curl. I'll do 4 sets of that. I'll do dumbbell incline hammer curl. I'll do 4 sets of that. Preacher curls, I'll do 3 sets. And then I'll do cable bicep curls for 5 sets. And then cable reverse curls for 4 sets. And then, I'll do some for triceps. So we're talking a lot of sets during this workout. And then I'll do dips with 4 sets of body weight. Usually I get about 20 reps on the first set for me being 255 pounds, and like 18, 15 reps after that for those 4 sets. And I think I end up with like 12 on the last one. But then I'll do easy bar, decline, close grip, skull crushers. I'll do the overhead cable press extension or cable extension on that. I'll do 5 sets of that. Cable tricep push down, I'll do 4 to 5 sets depending on how I feel. And then there's a few other exercises that I do, like concentration curls, dumbbell seated one arm tricep extensions and things like that. And so that's pretty much arm day. And then I'll throw in cardio at the end of about a mile and a half on treadmill or elliptical. I like the elliptical. It's easier on my knees and back. Don't like bicycle for some reason. I've had too many injuries, and that bent over position just doesn't do it for me. But yeah, that type of routine seems to work well for me 3 days a week. But I'm putting a lot of intensity into those workouts, and I have high volume. I'm working close to failure, so I have longer rest periods, about 2 to 3 minutes between sets, and it seems to work out well. If I have declining or weak areas that I want to work on, so let's say chest and back day. My chest is pretty good, but my back is lacking. So when I do that chest and back day, I'll actually do my back first to work on that weak area or the area that needs improvement, because that's when I'm the freshest and I can put the most intensity onto that muscle group. And then I'll end up doing chest. Same thing. You could do, legs. I like doing legs and shoulders. Excuse me. I like doing legs and shoulders. What's really good is that my shoulders are in pretty good shape right now. Legs, I need to work on my legs more, so I'm doing that in the first part of my workout, and then I rest, and then I go and do the shoulder workout, and I get enough recovery that I can do and get a good shoulder workout. I have looked over some information on some new studies of incorporating more volume by maybe, let me see if I can find it. Where's the overview? So like do biceps and triceps one day, have a day off, do legs and shoulders another day. But to throw in maybe 2 or 3 sets of biceps. So in other words, I'm going to add a little bit more volume and a couple more sets, like during leg day, maybe for biceps and triceps. Just do 2 or 3 sets. And so that'll add to the overall volume. And doing something like legs and shoulders, and I have enough rest period a day between those workout sessions, I'm good to go. So I have sufficient recovery time between my biceps and triceps, day off, legs, shoulders, and maybe 2 or 3 sets for arms. And then I have a day off, and then I come back and I do chest and back. So yeah, and I'm thinking about even doing, because I need to work on my legs more, of adding 2 or 3 sets to, say, like my chest day or my bicep and tricep day, of working one day doing one of those days doing more leg extensions or leg curls on those days. So maybe on bicep and tricep days, I'll throw in leg extensions, and maybe on chest and back day, I'll throw in some more leg curls. Again, adding to more overall volume, which will help equate to hypertrophy. And still be able to keep my workouts at 3 days a week. And I admit that I do more than what's needed in regards for the average person who wants to go to the gym and get healthy. The recommendation is 2 to 3 times a week. I would recommend 3 days a week of exercising with resistance training, whether it's machines, whether it's free weights, whether it's resistance bands, body weight, whatever it is, kettlebells, dumbbells, at least 3 days a week. That's usually what we see with the medical facility and sports scientists recommend. They also recommend that you do 75 to 100 minutes of cardio for heart health. So we need to take that into consideration as well, which is interesting because these one-set fitness influencers, they'll say 1 set per body part. You only got to work out twice a week for 20 minutes and you're good. They're not working on explosiveness. They're not working on cardio, which is really a detriment to seniors, because that's what this person is catering his special routine as being, the next best thing to sliced bread. And, oh, it's wonderful. Look at me. Look how big I am. That's anecdotal evidence, because just because you're big doesn't mean that everybody else is going to get big like you. That's why we have studies, because it could be that you just have great genetics. You got shitty workouts, but you got great genetics and you respond well. It doesn't mean that your routine is the bee's knees. Sorry, that's just the way it is. So Yeah, when you don't do cardio, I find it very problematic because cardio at that elevated level for 75 minutes to 150 minutes a week results up to 50% decrease in heart-related incidents like stroke, heart attacks, and so on and so forth. Lowers cholesterol. It's really a great thing for your heart and cardiovascular system. So if you're catering to seniors, you should be doing cardio. If you're catering to seniors, you should be doing multiple sets of resistance training because you will get 40 to 46% more for hypertrophy and strength gains than doing one set. It's just very problematic. And then you have people like Scott that are like, oh, it's not a recent study. Recent, it's 5 years old. That's not recent. It's like, you don't understand how to read studies. And, this is like the average person who goes to the gym. They read some stuff and they don't verify to see if it's true. They don't read studies to see if what they've been told is actually truthful. And unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that we got from the bodybuilding community is bro science that is not supported by actual science and testing with control groups. And again, the whole thing with Mike Mentzer and Dorian Yates, they refused to have their systems tested with a control group. Didn't know that, did you? Yeah. And even Dorian Yates's system, he doesn't do one set per body part like Mike Mentzer. He doesn't do one set per body part. They'll do like a superset, which is 2 sets, and then they'll do a hard working set, and then they'll do a decline set, or strip in the rack, or run it up and down, whatever. So they're doing multiple sets per body part. But the other glaring problem with those two guys and their one set per body part system is that the majority of their muscle mass was made through traditional means, which was multiple sets, 10, 15, 20 sets per body part per week, sometimes into 30 and 40 sets. So the majority of their muscle came from doing the traditional thing and not the thing that they're doing now. And they did a boatload of steroids. So, can you really trust that? Is that really, we want to compare apples to apples, not apples to rocks. If you got somebody who's killing it with steroids and they're pouring, mass amounts of, their testosterone trend smoothie every day and injecting it, in human growth hormones, spending $10,000-$20,000 a month on steroids. Yeah, it's probably doesn't directly translate over to people who are normal everyday people like you and me. Okay. That needs to take into consideration. But whenever you have somebody that refuses to have their system where they make fantastical claims about hypertrophy and strength gains, and they refuse to have it tested against a control group, that's very problematic. And the fact that there are 0 studies supporting what they say, they'll quote some anecdotal, they'll look for some studies, strength and hypertrophy, blah, blah, blah. But they don't have anything that took their actual system and showed whether it actually produces as they claim. Kind of like the 3-7 study that was done that showed it got a 80% better muscle hypertrophy than the control group. Well, what did the control group do? That also needs to be taken into consideration. If you have minimal amounts of sets, in other words, that 80% of more hypertrophy can sound like a huge, awesome number, but again, it depends on what the control group did. If they did less, then that increase that we see would be even more, which makes it sound more astounding. So again, we need some context when it comes to hypertrophy and strength training. Yeah. And then that other guy, that old guy, I think he's in his 70s. I think he's like 70, 69, 70, 71 or something. Phil Ferriss. Now he's doing this POE workout. POE, and you can be age strong, which really doesn't make sense because is there a metric to how strong a person should be at a certain age and that's what you're trying to attain? No, there is no metric. He just says age strong. You can be age strong for your age. Well, I know people that are 65 years old that are, deadlifting 800 pounds. Versus then there's other old people that only deadlift, 100 pounds. So are they both age strong? In other words, it's marketing hype. It's just hype of trying to sell a system and specialized equipment. And the interesting thing is, with all of these fantastical claims by this guy, Phil Ferris, is that, oh, this is so much better and this is better and it's more advanced and blah, blah, blah. Well, if that's the case, we would see universities, we would see professional sports teams, we would see natural and professional bodybuilders, supplemented bodybuilders would be using this to their advantage, and we don't. We would see Olympians jumping all over this because of the greater gains that they could get by using this specialized equipment and workout thing. But no, it's not. It's in other words, you're doing a set and it's just super slow and it's super slow, it's super slow and super slow, and you're doing 100%. Oh, it's terrible. And you watch the videos of him and doing these things. And it's kind of like a cable system, deadlift, but it's with a special machine that and you do one set per body part, and it's 100% of your 1 rep max. And it's bullshit. Because if it did produce the claims that he makes, Olympians would be using it. The sports world, the NFL, basketball players, wrestlers, they would be using that equipment, but they don't. Now, the reason why they don't is because we have a plethora of studies on health and fitness, hypertrophy, strength gains, and so on and so forth, where they have really nailed down what it takes to get strong or to get powerful or to get hypertrophy or get endurance training and what is involved with that. Performance-based training also comes into play. What are you trying to do? So unfortunately, these influencers, these fitness influencers that are making these claims are doing a disservice to the seniors that they're basically scamming money off of. And it's unfortunate. So, because it's all about the almighty dollar. And what's interesting is when you produce these studies, even about the 3-7 method or hypertrophy or strength or cardio or endurance or whatever it is, if it flies in the face of their claims, they start with the ad hominem attacks. They'll start name calling. They'll start, and it's just like, that's the key. That's when you say, oh, that's now I know it's bullshit, because you can't respond with any studies or meta-analysis to refute the studies that have been quoted. So yeah, I've had people, where I say, hey, read these studies, talks about hypertrophy, strength gain, so on and so forth. And I get yelled at and blah, 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 and call me names. And it's like, dude, don't argue. You're not arguing with me. It's plain as I'm just the messenger. Don't shoot the messenger. Go argue with the people with the PhDs. Go argue with the people who did the studies and the meta-analysis that involves tens of thousands of people, who did DEXA scans, body fat measurements, muscle biopsies of showing that this is what works when it comes to hypertrophy and strength training. So interesting enough, Phil Ferris has never had his system tested as well. And matter of fact, after much urging him to contact Schoenfeld and Menno Heiselman's, the people like that, even Ray Adeli, to contact them about his wonderful system, he refuses. Why? Because he knows it's bullshit. So he's either ignorant or he's a con man, or both. Ignorant con man. Those are the worst. And I find it very hard that he would be, or other people like him, are just ignorant. But there are stupid people out there as well. So maybe it's a mix of all three. Anyway, with that being said, I need to get some food in my stomach. I'm going to go hit the gym. Then we're going to go out for lunch. And that's going to be some fun times. But yeah, this is kind of interesting. When we talk about hypertrophy and strength gains, if you're interested in that, if you want a more detailed breakdown of the current routine that I'm doing, I'll type that up. And then if you contact me, you can email me there at theofficialburiedlife@gmail.com. Official The Buried Life. I can get that to you. Or if you have questions on overseas retirement, we're retired here in Korea. I also do some hobby and resin printing and painting and things like that. And if you enjoyed this information, you can always buy me a coffee and check that link there. So anyway, that's what we got going on. But I just thought it was interesting on the more I read, the more I become educated and understand studies and what they look at, the more there's a clear divide between the BS and established facts and truth. And unfortunately, there's more BS. You know, cream rises to the top and the crap floats to the bottom. It sinks. And unfortunately, more and more on social medias, that's what I end up seeing with a lot of influencers, and that are selling programs and trying to make these claims. Like there was one guy who said he put on 25 pounds of pure muscle, rippling muscle in 1 month. And it's like, how much were you eating? How many calories a month or per day? And the interesting thing is he said, I can't remember off the top of my head, and it's like, I'm thinking about it and I pull out the calculator. It's like, no, that's not, you didn't put on 25 pounds of pure muscle. One, you might have gotten big, but it's not 25 pounds of pure muscle. You didn't do a body scan. You didn't do a body fat caliper test to verify. You definitely didn't eat enough calories. And I broke down the math for him because it takes about like 2,800 calories, with protein and carbs and so on and so forth, appropriate high protein intake to be able to build muscle. And it's interesting because there was another study, and I'm trying to find it again, where it showed that the muscle protein synthesis occurs after 18 workouts. It's not set in stone, but it's interesting that it takes 18 workouts to get muscle protein synthesis. And maybe if you drop it down, let's say 12, how many workouts do you have to do to break down those muscle fibers? You'll get some inflammation, you'll get some swelling from that damage that you do to your muscle fibers. And really, to build new muscle fibers, we're talking about 18 times that you work that muscle group. So when you have somebody that comes along and says, oh, you only need to work out twice a week, 20 minutes each time, and you'll get superior strength and hypertrophy gains, again, I know that's bullshit compared to somebody who just goes to the gym 2 or 3 times a week with multiple sets, 2 and 3 sets per body part. You'll get way superior results. But again, tests already show that in studies. Yeah, fun stuff. The more you know. And apparently there's a lot of people that don't know, and they don't want to know. But that's it. So anyway, that's it that we got for today. I think we're going to enjoy it. Here in Korea, it ends up that the weather is actually getting cooler. It was a few days ago like 93 degrees and crazy humidity. And now, what we end up, like today, it's currently 67 with a high of 82. And then the rest of the week is going to be low 80s, and then next week it's going to be like 70, 74, mid 70s, with a low of 70, stuff like that as the lowest high. Enjoying that time, because that heat and humidity has been killing me. I hate it. But now that's over, so it's good. So anyway, like, subscribe to the channel on The Varied Life on YouTube. I would appreciate that. If you buy me coffee, that would be cool, and you would be one of the awesome people who buys me coffee. Those are the awesome people that you see down there. And actually need to add in Jeremy as another person on that list who bought me some coffees, and so I want to say thank you for that. So I'll need to update that as well. Matter of fact, let me see if I can text overlay. Jeremy. I don't even know how to spell Jeremy. Anyway, that's not going to work anyway. Anyway, so that's it. Appreciate it, and we'll see you on the next video. Peace. Crazy stuff.